Welcome to Headstones and Microphones, Founder Stories, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation of history's most visionary founders. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these trailblazers. Now, let's meet our guest. Today, we are joined by an absolute titan of broadcasting, entertainment, and culture. He took black joy, music, and fashion and broadcast it right into the living rooms of America, creating the longest-running, first-run syndicated show in television history. Please welcome the legendary creator of Soul Train, Mr. Don Cornelius. Don, it is an absolute honor to have you here.
Thank you so much, Calvin.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours, Don. Your career was legendary. But let's dive right into those early days. When you first conceived of your business, the world was a very different place. What was the exact moment you realized society was moving in a direction only you could see? And how did you convince the early skeptics?
Well, Calvin, it really goes back to the late 1960s when I was working in radio and television news in Chicago. I was heavily inspired by the civil rights movement, and I couldn't help but notice a massive void on television. There was absolutely no major venue for soul music or black youth culture. We had all this incredible talent, this exploding genre of rhythm and blues and funk, but the mainstream networks were completely blind to it. The exact moment for me was realizing that young people, not just black kids, but kids of all backgrounds, were completely gravitating toward this music and the lifestyle around it. When I approached the station executives at WCIU-TV with the idea of a televised soul music dance party, the skeptics thought it was too niche. But I pointed to the local high schools where I had been promoting a traveling concert tour called the Soul Train. The kids were packing those gyms out. I told the executives if they are jumping out of their shoes to see these artists locally, they will tune in to see them on the screen.
That is incredible foresight. You saw the wave before it even hit the shore. But leaving behind safety to build something entirely unproven is a massive gamble. What did your life look like the day you decided to go all in? And what was the core belief that gave you the courage to take that first step?
It was a terrifying time, Calvin, let me tell you. In 1966, before I landed firmly in broadcasting, I was bouncing around working as a tire salesman, an insurance salesman, and even an officer with the Chicago Police Department. I had a wife and 2 young sons to support, and when I decided to quit my secure day job to take a 3-month broadcasting course, I had exactly $400 in my bank account. It looked like madness to a lot of people around me, but the core belief that gave me the courage to take that leap was simple. I knew I had a voice, and I knew our culture deserved a professional, dignified platform. I believed in myself, and I believed that the music and the people I wanted to represent were powerful enough to break through any barrier.
$400 and a dream. That is the definition of a leap of faith. In the absolute beginning, when you had no data, no capital, and no blueprint, what was the one truth you held onto that everyone else around you dismissed?
The one truth I held on to was that black culture was beautiful, elegant, and universally appealing. Back then, mainstream media often viewed urban youth culture through a very narrow, sometimes negative lens. People dismissed the idea that a show entirely centered on black music and black teenage dancers could have mainstream commercial viability. But I knew the truth, black joy, the fashion, the rhythm, it was pure magic. And it was going to dictate the trend for the entire world. I knew if we put on a show that showcased our youth in a positive, classy light, nobody would be able to turn away.
And you were exactly right. It became the hippest trip in America. But long before your company became a household name, you hit a wall where everything nearly collapsed. Take us back to that first major failure or setback. What went wrong, and how did you find the willpower to restart?
When we first started in 1970 on WCIU, we were just a local daily show in Chicago. We were working with a shoestring budget, a tiny, claustrophobic studio, and almost no resources. I had to scrape together my own personal funds just to cut the pilot. In those early months, trying to secure major corporate sponsors who were willing to back a black-hosted dance show felt like hitting a brick wall day after day. We almost collapsed from a lack of funding before we even got off the ground. The willpower to keep going came from the kids who showed up to dance every single day. Seeing their enthusiasm and knowing what this show meant to the local community made stopping out of the question. I kept pushing, secured Sears as a sponsor, and that kept us alive long enough to dream bigger.
Innovation often looks like madness to contemporaries. Was there a specific product, philosophy, or strategy you were utterly convinced would work, but the public or the industry initially rejected or ridiculed? How did you respond?
The strategy that faced the most resistance was my absolute insistence on retaining total ownership and creative control of the brand. In the television industry at that time, a black producer owning their own nationally syndicated show was virtually unheard of. Executives wanted me to hand over the reins, or they wanted to format the show in a way that fit their traditional ideas. When we prepared to move the show to Los Angeles for national syndication in 1971, there were plenty of people who thought an independent black-owned syndicated show couldn't survive against the major network machines. I responded by standing my ground and negotiating the first contract of its kind that gave me complete ownership. I knew that if we didn't own our culture, someone else would shape it for us.
Behind the legendary name was a human being facing immense pressure, whether from financial panics, internal betrayal, or personal doubt. How did you shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter?
The pressure was immense because I wasn't just a host smiling on camera. I was the writer, the producer, and the business owner. Every single decision rested on my shoulders, and as the show grew, so did the financial stakes and the logistical nightmares. Later on, I even faced major health hurdles, including a massive 21-hour brain surgery in 1982 to correct a blood vessel issue that left me dealing with severe physical effects for the rest of my days. To shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter, I had to compartmentalize. The moment I walked into that studio and heard the music track start, I had to put on that smooth, calm demeanor. I owed it to the artists, the dancers, and the audience to keep the train moving smoothly, no matter what storm was raging in my personal life.
That is true professionalism, Don. Talk about the people who helped you build the tracks for that train. Who were the very first people, beyond your immediate family, to buy into what you were doing? How did you convince early workers or customers to trust an entirely unproven concept?
The very first people to buy into the vision were the local Chicago musicians and the local teenagers. Groups like the Chai Lights and the Emotions trusted me enough to come on our early local broadcasts when we had almost nothing to offer them but exposure. To convince the early dancers, I didn't need a complex pitch. I just filled that local studio, turned up the music, and told them to dance and be themselves. For the business side, it was folks like the executives at the Afro Sheen and Ultra Sheen hair care companies. They understood the vision immediately because they saw the same market I did, and their early financial backing was crucial in helping us prove the concept to the rest of the syndication market.
Can you take us to the exact moment where you felt the momentum shift? What was the specific milestone, contract, or breakthrough where you realized, we aren't just going to survive, we are going to change everything?
The definitive tipping point was the move to Los Angeles in 1971 and securing national syndication. But the exact moment I knew we were changing the entire cultural landscape was when we started booking the absolute biggest stars in music, like James Brown, Aretha Franklin, and Marvin Gaye. When James Brown walked onto our set, looked around, and gave us his full endorsement, it sent a shockwave through the entertainment industry. Suddenly, we weren't just a television show anymore. We were a mandatory stop for any artist who wanted to reach the pulse of American music. That was the moment I realized Soul Train was an unstoppable force.
You didn't just build a company, you built a distinct culture and philosophy that outlasted you. In the early days, when it was just a handful of people in a room, how did you instill that standard of excellence or service?
I instilled it by being incredibly meticulous about the presentation. I wanted everything to look first class. From the way I dressed in my tailored suits to the way the cameras captured the dancers, I demanded dignity. I told our small crew and the young people on the floor that we were representing something bigger than ourselves. We introduced things like the Soul Train line and the scramble board to create structure, but within that structure we gave the kids total freedom to innovate. That combination of high professional standards and authentic creative freedom became our hallmark.
History books often flatten a person's life into a neat, polished narrative. What is the biggest misconception people have about your journey, your character, or how your company was actually built?
I think the biggest misconception is that it was always just a fun, easygoing party because of how smooth it looked on television. People saw me standing there with my deep voice and an easy smile, looking like the coolest guy in the room, and they assumed the business ran itself. In reality, I was a very intense, driven, and at times conservative businessman. I fought tooth and nail behind the scenes for every inch of territory we conquered. It wasn't a casual ride, it was a grueling daily operation to protect the integrity of the brand and keep control of our own narrative.
Building an empire always requires a steep personal cost. Looking back at the entirety of your life, what was the hardest sacrifice you had to make for the sake of your vision? And was it ultimately worth it?
The hardest sacrifice was undoubtedly the toll it took on my personal life, my peace of mind, and my health. When you pour 100% of your soul into building a cultural institution, your time is never truly your own. The constant stress, the grueling production schedules, and the weight of being a trailblazer meant that my personal life and my well-being often took a back seat. But looking back at the artists we launched, the dancers we empowered, and the way we shifted global pop culture to embrace Black joy, I would have to say it was worth it. We built a beautiful time capsule that can never be erased.
If you could send a single sentence back through time to yourself on the very first day you started this venture, knowing every trial, triumph, and heartbreak that awaited you, what would you say?
I would look myself right in the eye and say, trust your vision, hold on to your ownership, and remember that the love, peace, and soul you give to the world will become your everlasting legacy.
That is beautiful. Don, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before we sign off?
I just want to thank you again, Calvin, for this wonderful conversation. To all the listeners out there, always remember to support one another, stay true to your roots, and keep pushing for your dreams. And you can bet your last money it's all going to be a stone gas, honey. Thank you for having me.
What an absolute masterclass in vision, determination, and cultural pride from the one and only Don Cornelius. From a radio reporter with $400 in Chicago to creating a historic television empire, Don showed us all what it means to build a legacy with style and substance. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast, Founder Stories. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.